he's just fucking lying.
What do you say? I have a question. What do you say about politicians that constantly reaffirm Israel's right to exist? Because people like me are constantly attacked by politicians for standing up for—
White guy, dipshit. He signaled the right thing. You're so fucking retarded. He's actually so fucking stupid. I've never heard someone talk formally about it, but you can tell with the answers that he dog whistles. He's a one-stater who supports the Palestinian infinite right of return. If you want to be like the maximalist Palestinian dick suck, Zoran or whatever is given the correct answer. But this fucking retard is so uneducated, is so nitwit about the whole topic, he doesn't even realize it. He's such a fucking moron. Trade in your kafaya for a fucking book, you moron. Oh my god, he's so stupid. I don't care. These people all deserve each other though. I'm just kidding. We love you, Zordan.
Israel's right to exist. Because people like me are constantly attacked by politicians for standing up for Palestine, and you are constantly defending the right for Israel to exist. My family is in Palestine right now, constantly under attack, and I'm hearing you—
I don't believe it. I think he's lying. I bet he's lying. Who is this guy? Find me the guy. Who is he?
Say free Palestine, but also Israel has the right to exist. Don't be hypocritical. Don't be hypocritical and say free Palestine when you're also defending the right for Israel to exist. It does not have the right to exist. It does not have the right to exist. It's not your land to say it has the right to exist.
Can you explain why Jewish Americans are expected to vote for a man who directly calls for their deaths when another Democrat Party candidate option exists in the form of Eric Adams? I don't believe that Mamdani directly calls for your death. He's just kind of weak on rhetoric, number one. Number two, he doesn't have any influence on American foreign policy, so it's not relevant. And number three, Eric Adams is a literal pawn puppet tool of the current Trump admin. So, yeah.
You are the most unfairly vilified man on planet Earth. Before you were one of the most politically controversial figures on the planet. You're a doctor.
Well, there I was. It was 1981. I graduated in medicine from St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London. I was one of 5 generations, now 6 generations of my family to graduate from that medical school. Medicine was really in our blood, I suppose you could say. And I was entirely mainstream, whatever that means. And I had a specific interest in inflammatory bowel disease. I got my fellowship at the Royal College of Surgeons, my fellowship at the Royal College of Pathologists, and I was running a research team at the Royal Free, which was part of the university teaching hospitals at the University of London. And it was a very exciting time. We were making great progress. And we had started to examine the cause of inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's colitis, and had made some very interesting observations in the context of natural measles infection and unusual exposures to natural measles leading to these diseases. And in 1995, I started getting calls from
Okay, but Mamdani is literally a pawn puppet of people like Hassan Piker. If you believe this, then you're out of my reach. So good luck.
Parents leading to these diseases. And in 1995, I started getting calls from parents, highly articulate, intelligent parents saying, my child was perfectly normal. They had speech-language interaction with their siblings. They were sleeping well, eating well, growing well. And then they had their MMR vaccine. I wasn't anti-vaccine, doctor. I took them to be vaccinated on time. And within a very short space of time after the vaccine, they lost all their skills. Speech, language gone. Their eyes glazed over. The lights went out in their eyes. It was a very common description. They stopped sleeping at night. They were screaming. They were in pain. I knew they were in pain, even though they lost the ability to communicate. As their mother, I knew they were suffering. And I said, how can I help? They said, well, they were eventually diagnosed with autism. And I said, I know nothing about autism. You must have got the wrong number.
Because even this part of the story is pretty shocking. It's not as though you started out investigating autism. As you say, you were investigating gut issues.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do you go from investigating measles and vaccines and gut issues to autism?
Well, that's exactly the question I asked them. I said, when I was at medical school, autism was so rare, we weren't even taught about it. There was no class on autism.
I think
1 in 10,000 children.
Yes, whatever statistic I saw, it said in 1966 it was 1 in 2,500, and then in 2000 it was 1 in 150, and then today it's 1 in 36 kids is getting diagnosed with autism.
Even more, 1 in 31. 1 in 20 boys. It's more common in boys than girls.
How do you explain that?
Well, that's a very good question. So this is what the parents brought to my attention. They said, doctor, my child has intractable gastrointestinal problems, diarrhea, alternating constipation and diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain, failure to thrive, all the cardinal features of an underlying inflammatory bowel disease. But the doctors and nurses I've been to see, doctors, say, this is just part of autism. Get over it. Put your child in a home. Have another child and forget about it. I thought, this is extraordinary. I've never heard medicine respond in this way at all. Now, they said the other thing, doctor, is there is an epidemic of this problem, of developmentally normal children suddenly losing their skills and becoming autistic. And so I said, okay, now the fundamental rule of clinical medicine, okay, let's go right back to the beginning, is to listen to the parents. No one knows children like their parents, particularly the mother. There is a connection there that no pediatrician can usurp. Okay, so it is the golden rule is you put all of your biases aside and you listen to the parents. What are they telling me? Is there a consistency to this story? Is there a coherence? Is it possible that an underlying inflammatory bowel disease can interact with the brain and damage it? We don't know. But certainly in diseases like celiac disease, where there's an allergic sensitivity to gluten in wheat, then the presenting features can be dementia or seizures or developmental regression or autism. So yes, there is a link. We don't know what the nature of that link is, but yes, there is a plausible link. And I said to the Department of Health once, if I take you for a pint of beer, you may begin to understand what I'm talking about. They thought I was trying to offer them to go out for a beer and enjoy their company. Nothing could be further from the truth. What I was saying is if you drink a pint of beer, within a very short period of time, you will feel the cerebral effects of that pint of beer on your brain. There is a gut-brain connection. This isn't difficult.
Even simply, if you take alcohol out of it, some women in my life, if they are a little late to lunch, they get a bit hangry, okay? You see emotional and psychological connections.
We are one entity. Right. This is not separate from this. So I thought, right, we need to look at this. Put all of our biases aside, whether my children were vaccinated or not, nothing to do with it. They're telling us a story that we have to act upon. And this is serious. It's clearly serious because until proven otherwise, these children have an intestinal disease. And if it's correctable, can we make their lives at least bearable, if not reverse some element of what's going on? So I put together a large team of some of the best people in the world. The leading pediatric gastroenterologist in the world, Professor John Walker-Smith, and his team from St. Bartholomew's Hospital, psychiatrists, neurologists, and people. And we came together and we investigated these children according to their clinical need. It wasn't research, according to their clinical need. John Walker-Smith, the leader of the clinical team, made the decision that these children merited investigation. And lo and behold, when we scoped them, we biopsied, we looked at the biopsies under the microscope, there was inflammation. The parents were right. And when we treated that inflammation with the kind of medication that we would use for Crohn's or colitis, anti-inflammatories, dietary intervention, removal of gluten.
Hold on, which study is he referring to right now?
The team made the decision that these...
What was the original, was he referring to the one we read? Or was he referring to a different study here?
Children merited investigation, their clinical need. John, when we came together and we investigated these children according to their clinical need. It wasn't research, according to their clinical need. John Walker-Smith, the lead...
John Walker-Smith. Was this the second one with 40 people? Oh no, J. Walker-Smith. Is he referring to the second one with 40 people, or is he referring to the first one with 12 people?
Leader of the clinical team made the decision that these children merited investigation. And lo and behold, when we scoped them, we biopsied, we looked at the biopsies under the microscope, there was inflammation. The parents were right. And when we treated that inflammation with the kind of medication that we would use for Crohn's or colitis, anti-inflammatories, dietary intervention, removal of gluten and cow's milk products from the diet, there was a dramatic improvement. Again, these insights had come from parents. We followed up on those insights, and they were true.
There's a dramatic improvement in...
This is not what that study was at all. So he must be talking about a different one. There was a second one that he said that they, like 39 out of 40. What am I thinking of? Up to January 20th, further 40 patients have been assessed, 39 with the syndrome. Does anybody know what that study is? 40 patient study, Andy Wakefield. Look at the end of the OG study. I just see this addendum. But I don't know what the...
In the symptoms of autism.
Not just the bowel symptoms, but the cognitive symptoms of colitis, anti-inflammatories, dietary intervention, removal of gluten and cow's milk products from the diet. There was a dramatic improvement.
I don't know which one he's citing. He might just be lying. Yeah, is he just lying? Because if he's talking about his study, he's just fucking lying. It sounds like he's accurately describing the testing and everything they did, or the analysis and examination they did of the biopsies and everything, but there was no treatment in this study at all. I would be surprised if there was a treatment in this one, because again, it just says assessed, like with the syndrome or whatever. So he's just lying, I guess.
Again, these insights had come from parents. We followed up on those insights, and they were true.
There's a dramatic improvement in the symptoms of autism.
Not just the bowel symptoms, but the cognitive symptoms as well. People say, well, they were just out of pain. They were feeling better. They were asleep. No, this was children who were using words that they had not used for 5 years. Words that you would have disappeared from their vocabulary were all in there. They came back.
Because your critics say, well, sure, maybe the autism symptoms set in around the time that kids are vaccinated. However, that's just the time. It's just coincidental. The time that you get the vaccines is around the time that autism symptoms manifest. But what you're saying is, yeah, but hold on, when we started treating the gastrointestinal issues, the vaccine symptoms started to subside. So it can't just be a mere coincidence here, because we did something, we intervened, and that had an effect on the autism symptoms.
Yes, you had an exposure and a withdrawal effect, just as you say. They were fine, they weren't fine, they improved. And those time points were punctuated by their exposure to the vaccine and then their removal of these potential toxins from the diet.
And no one else has followed up on this research in any country around the world? No company wants to make a fuck ton of money treating any of these conditions? Nobody has any interest anywhere, private or public, in any country for 30 years to follow up on this groundbreaking cure for autism?
And the historical teaching of the experts in autism was that symptoms manifest from birth. Autism is genetic and it starts from birth. Suddenly it was, oh no, the symptoms manifest at 15, 18 months. That's not what you said. That's not what it says in the textbooks. You say regression. So here's the key is that where do you go from here? Because the parents had said, my child was fine, they regressed. They regressed in many cases after a vaccine. They have a bowel disease until proven otherwise. The diet works and they can improve. The expert opinion at that time is, my dear boy, children are autistic from birth, it's genetic. There is no regression, no developmental or behavioral regression. There is no link with any kind of underlying bowel disease. That's just incidental. There is no improvement. The diet has no effect at all. The medical experts, God save us from medical experts, were wrong on every single count. You could take that library of textbooks written by experts and burn it to the ground.
One of the craziest things that like MAGA does right now, or stupid people, or whatever you call these people, is they will make a prediction, okay? They'll make a prediction. Time will pass. It never comes true. And then they'll say, we were right. Like, this happened with so much COVID and vaccine related stuff. There's going to be so much vaccine injury. Like, the COVID is all fake, and like there's a billion different things. And none of the predicted claims about the infinite encroachment of government power and vaccine passports and all none of it came true. And they're like, looks like we were right about everything. No, motherfucker, you were literally wrong about everything. Did we forget history? We can go back and look at your predictions, motherfucker. None of them came true. Literally none of it happened. It was all bullshit. How are you trying to say you were right the whole time? What?
Value of the story from one parent telling you what actually happened. It is an extraordinary reiteration of that fundamental rule of medicine, and something that we've largely forgotten in our arrogance in medicine, to listen to the parents, because they were right on every count. Now, when they say, I believe my child regressed after a vaccine, with that knowledge, do we dismiss their story? Do we say, actually, you may be right, but this isn't going to be good for my career, so would you take your child and leave this room and shut the door behind you? Thank you. That's what happened.
That is
what was happening. And that's not what I signed up for. That's not what I went into medicine. I didn't have a bias one way or the other about whether the vaccine...
Destiny talking about bad predictions is ironic. I feel like most of my predictions over the past few years politically, I feel like they've actually been decently okay. Excuse me, what are we referencing here?
Vaccine was involved, but there was a moral and professional obligation to investigate, to answer their questions. Because if it were true that there is an epidemic of this particular problem, then we need to know this. We need to know it. And my pediatric colleague said to me at the time, Andy, we as pediatricians cannot be seen to question the safety of MMR. I said, what does that mean? Is your priority not to your patients, rather than to your reputation amongst your careers at the Royal Society? I mean, who are you answerable to? But that was the position. We cannot be seen to do this. And I went to see the dean of the medical school.
Okay, so this isn't going to be anything about... How can you guys consume so much slop? Like, what conservatives watch, another 2-hour podcast about the experts being wrong about everything and big pharma. And it's like, how can you, another one of the same hour and a half podcasts, another of the exact same? Oh my God.
I was called into his office. He said, Andy, if you continue this vaccine safety research, it will not be good for your career. There was an overt threat. He was absolutely right. It wasn't good for my career. But, I was a sort of headstrong, somewhat idealistic young doctor. And I was raised in a particular way. And I thought, it just made me angry. It made me determined to work twice as hard, because it was such a tragedy. And it seemed to me that if it were avoidable or treatable, then we should know that. And that was the course I pursued. I was entirely open about it with my colleagues at every stage. But that was the moral and professional obligation that I felt I had. And
so what year was this?
Every stage, then we should know that. And that was the course I pursued. I was entirely open about it with my colleagues.
Entirely open about it with my colleagues? You wasn't open about all the conflict of interest, but okay.
At every stage. But that was the moral and professional obligation that I felt I had. And
so what year was this?
This was from 1995 onwards.
And in 1998, you published the famous study in the Lancet.
Right. Yeah.
So the study comes out, and I actually have trouble in the popular reporting on this, even determining what the study said, because they seem to accuse the study of saying things that it didn't necessarily say. So what did the study say?
study was a case series. So this is the way in which human disease syndromes are described. You have a small group of people who have a consistent pattern of signs and symptoms that merit investigation in their own right. That leads to hypothesis testing studies. Is this different from something we've seen before? Is it new? What's causing it? Those are downstream. This was a case series just reporting what the parents had told us, what the doctors had told us who referred them, and what we found on clinical investigation. We could not leave out the parents' reference to the MMR, but we said at the conclusion of the study, this study does not prove an association, let alone a causal association, with the MMR vaccine.
So hold on.
So he's correct that that's what the study said, but that's not what he was saying in the media. That's not what he was out there saying, which is the huge problem. And that's not what he's gone out to say. So now he's doing earlier what I did, where I okay, when you read the study itself, it doesn't actually seem that objectionable or objectionable at all. But that wasn't the issue. The issue were the crazy statements that he made afterwards about it.
This is the part that's craziest in the story to me. You are blamed for creating vaccine skepticism. You are blamed with measles outbreaks. You are blamed and called a terrible fraudster and a horrible practitioner of medicine because you said in your 1998 study that the MMR vaccine causes autism, except you didn't say that.
Quite the opposite. And we said what we do need is further research into this matter, and that was it. And the study was really a report of the bowel disease in combination with this regressive developmental disorder.
Okay, now, but I read, again, just in popular reporting, this was more than a few years ago now, that study, even with its modest conclusion, was retracted by the authors of the study. But I'm sitting across from one of the authors of the study. You didn't retract it. So what was that? Was the study retracted?
No, it wasn't. And this was another myth that's been perpetrated by the media.
I went into this interview thinking, I don't really know anything about this. And now I'm convinced I actually know less about this than I thought I did going in.
Why not do any research before interviewing such a controversial figure, but okay.
Yes, the study, it made no claim of causation. Okay, this was the important thing. And that's what I was accused of labeling MMR as the cause of autism. No, we faithfully reported the facts of what we found on clinical investigation. The clinical findings from Professor John Walker-Smith and his team, the pathologist's findings down the microscope from a highly experienced expert pathologist, the psychiatric findings, the neurological findings.
Wait, real quick. Is there a link to the press conference that he did about that study? Andy Wakefield press conference. Can I find that? Is that David Pakman? Holy shit, he's a little baby boy.
Careful about being clear that there were no actual mechanisms that they had identified. In fact, they didn't have any real evidence. This was something.
You are considered by some to be a controversial researcher, based mostly on the first study that you did. Describe that if you can.
Certainly, the first study was a case series, a report of the clinical findings and the histories of 12 children who had regressed into an autistic spectrum disorder. 8 of the parents of the children saying that this was following an MMR vaccine. And our duty was not only to investigate those children to see if we could get to the root of their symptoms, in particular their bowel symptoms, their diarrhea, their pain, and their maldigestion, but also to report their history. My child regressed after an MMR vaccine. We don't place any interpretation on that, and we said specifically this does not prove an association between the vaccine and the disorder, but we have an obligation as doctors and scientists to faithfully report what the parent has told us.
What did the study?
What? You don't have any obligation to put this in a study. This isn't like you're treating a patient and you have to follow up on care or whatever. That's just a complete total lie, but okay.
Fine. What was the conclusion in essence?
The conclusion was that there is a bowel disease in children with autism, which is new, which has not been investigated before. That this may well be related to the developmental regression since they had occurred at around the same time, and that the association, the parental association with MMR exposure needed to be thoroughly investigated.
What year was this?
This was 1998.
Now, while you certainly in the study, which I have read, did not recommend people stop vaccinating their children, it didn't make any sort of recommendations like that. In fact, you've told me before your children have been vaccinated, your own children.
That's right, my first 2 children received MMR.
However, there was sort of a scare, and people in England, some people...
Fuck! Is there really no original, try Google. Andy Wakefield, 1998. Andy Wakefield, 1998. Press conference. Are you planning on covering the BBB more in detail at some point? For what? It's shit. It's dog shit. Everything about it is dog shit. I don't know what else you want to go over about it. It's dog shit. It's horrible. It doesn't do what they want it to do, and it certainly doesn't do what we want it to do. It's just dog shit. But in actuality, it's based because it makes me richer and it fucks you losers over.
In 5 years ago, a bombshell was dropped by scientists announcing the results of research, which some of them thought cast doubts on the safety of the triple vaccine against measles, mumps and rubella.
I do think that there is a case for dissociating
these vaccines into their component parts, separate measles, mumps and rubella vaccines, given perhaps by separation of 1 year.
So he's recommending that as the lead author of this study, and the same time he's presenting it, assuming this is in 1998. So like he didn't have that in the study, but he sure as fuck was saying it, no? Why can't I? Is this not recorded anywhere? Is this the Great March of Return? Is this because we looked this up before on this website? The fuck? I vividly remember the press conference. God damn it. Part of it in the H-Bomber Guy video?
Chief, is that still a current reference? I've aged 10 years in the last 2 weeks. Time is meaningless. But despite a lot of
it's like
page can see really
that we may be
also he kind of looks like Bill Hader a little bit here too, right? I see it. Whatever.
That's what we reported, and we urged further research. It was a great opportunity to understand what was going on and take what was historically an irreversible condition and be able to reverse it, to be able to treat it, to ameliorate the symptoms in these children and make their lives at least better. So it was it should have been an exciting time, but we defended.
Wait, when I heard this said, I thought that he like left his son's birthday party to go take blood samples. But he took the blood samples at the birthday party. Wait, what? The doctor who said he triggered a collapse in public confidence and the combined measles. But did they have the birthday party in a hospital? Maybe his child had leukemia. The doctor who said he triggered a collapse in public confidence in the combined measles, mumps, and rubella and rubella vaccine told a disciplinary panel last week that he made up details of his son's birthday party, at which he took blood samples from several children, when giving a speech in California. The Lancet later repudiated that paper after it emerged that Dr. Wakefield had extensive financial ties to lawyers and families who were pursuing the manufacturers of the vaccine and the courts, and that most of his research participants were litigants. So the actual children so the families themselves had children, and the families were litigants against. Oh, this is immediately. That's so far beyond. That's worse than conflict of interest. You're beyond. Oof. Okay. The GMC's charges against Dr. Wakefield include allegations that in 1998, while a consultant at the Royal Free Hospital in London, he unethically paid children at his son's 10th birthday party, each to give blood samples that he wanted for his research. Last week, the GMC panel saw video footage of a speech Dr. Wakefield gave in 1999 at a meeting of parents of autistic children called by the Mind Institute of the University of California, Davis, where he jokingly described children fainting and vomiting after giving blood. 2 children fainted, one threw up over his mother. He told his laughing audience in the clip, "People said to me, you can't do that. Children won't come back to your birthday parties." I said, "We live in a market economy. Next year they'll want 10 pounds. But Dr. Wakefield told the GMC panel that he made up these details to amuse his listeners. It was the end of a long and rather exacting talk for the parents, and it was an attempt to introduce a little bit of levity, he said. It was a quip, just a story. The way these stories are told, the audience responds, you tend to respond back, so the story was told, but it had no bearing on the truth at all. Okay. Jesus. Wait, is there any more evidence of that? Andrew Wakefield, study, families suing, MMR vaccine. I was looking for an expert witness to start a planned class action regarding alleged vaccine damage. Barr hired Wakefield at 150 pounds per hour plus expenses, and only then do they recruit the 12 children. Actively seeking the parents of cases that might imply a connection between MMR and autism. Barr and Wakefield convinced the UK Legal Aid Board, a UK government organization of financial support people who cannot afford access to justice, to assign £55,000 to fund the initial stage of the research. The project was intended to create evidence for the court case, but this only became publicly known 6 years after the Lancet report. The first part of the special BMJ series, Brian Deere, that's the guy who did the investigative work, and we watched a documentary on him, the journalist guy, exposes the bogus data behind claims that launched a worldwide scare over the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and reveals how the appearance of a link with autism was manufactured at a London medical school. When I broke the news to the father of child 11, at first he did not believe me. Wakefield told us that my son was the 13th child they saw, he said, gazing for the first time at the now infamous research paper which linked a purported new syndrome with the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. There's only 12 in this. The paper was published in the Lancet on February 28, 1998. It was retracted on February 2nd, 2010. Authored by Andrew Wakefield, John Walker Smith, and 11 others from the Royal Free Medical School, London, it reported on 12 developmentally challenged children and triggered a decade-long public health scare. Onset of behavioral symptoms was associated by the parents with measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination, and 8 of the 12 children began the paper's findings. Adopting these claims as fact, its results section added, in these 8 children, the average interval from exposure to first behavioral symptoms was 6.3 days. Mr. 11, an American engineer, looked again at the paper, a 5-page case series of 11 boys and 1 girl, aged between 3 and 9 years. 9 children, it said, had diagnoses of regressive autism, and all but 1 were reported with nonspecific colitis. The new syndrome brought these together, linking brain and bowel diseases. His son was the penultimate case. Running his finger across the paper's tables over coffee in London, Mr. 11 seemed reassured by his anonymized son's age and other details, but then he pointed at table 2, headed neuropsychiatric diagnosis, and for a second time objected, that's not true. Child 11 was among the 8 whose parents apparently blamed MMR. The interval between his vaccination and the first behavioral symptom was reported as 1 week. This symptom was said to have appeared at age 15 months, but his father, whom I had tracked down, said this was wrong. From the information he provided me on our son, who I was shocked to hear had been included in their published study, he wrote to me, again, we met in California. The data clearly appeared to be distorted. He backed his concerns with medical records, including a royal-free discharge summary. Although the family lived 5,000 miles from the hospital, in February of 97, the boy, then aged 5, had been flown to London and admitted for Wakefield's project, the undisclosed goal of which was to help sue the vaccine's manufacturers. Unknown to Mr. 11, Wakefield was working on a lawsuit for which he sought a bowel-brain syndrome as its centerpiece, claiming an undisclosed £150 an hour through a Norfolk solicitor named Richard Barr. He had been confidentially put on the payroll 2 years before the paper was published, eventually grossing him £435,643 plus expenses. Curiously, however, Wakefield had already identified such a syndrome before the project, which would reputedly discover it. Children with enteritis and disintegrative disorder, an expression he used for bowel inflammation and regressive autism, form part of a new syndrome, he and Barr explained in a confidential grant application to the UK government's Legal Aid Board before any of the children were investigated. Ooh, that was in the seeking money. He already was explaining the syndrome. Yikes. Destiny, I found a transcript. Oh, you found a transcript of the press release? Nice. Or of the thing they did. Okay, hold on. Okay, I've always heard about like the autism study and that the autism study was debunked or whatever, but I just assumed that it was like they fudged a few of the numbers or some bullshit. I didn't realize it was like this fucked. This is like super mega fucked, right? Like, and it wasn't even a good original paper to base something this broad on. N equals 12. Did they say the number of children that were involved in it? I guess they were trying to downplay the study initially. Did they say 12 children? I think they did, right? Nonetheless, the evidence is undeniably in favor of a specific vaccine-induced pathology. The two men also aim to show a sudden onset temporal association, strong evidence in product liability. Dr. Wakefield feels that if we can show a clear time link between the vaccination and onset of symptoms, Barr told the legal board, we should be able to dispose of the suggestion that it's simply a chance encounter. But Child 11's case must have proved a disappointment. Records show that his behavioral symptoms started too soon. His developmental milestones were normal until 13 months of age. Notice the discharge summary. In the period 13 to 18 months, he developed slow speech patterns and repetitive hand movements. Over this period, his parents remarked on his slow, gradual deterioration. That put the first symptoms 2 months earlier than reported in the Lancet and a month before the the boy received the MMR vaccination. And this was not the only anomaly to catch the father's eye. What the paper reported as a behavioral symptom was noted in the records as a chest infection. Please let me know if Andrew W. has his doctor's license revoked, wrote Mr. 11, who is convinced that many vaccines and environmental pollutants may be responsible for his childhood brain disorders. His misrepresentation of my son in his research paper is inexcusable. His motives for this I may never know. The father need not have worried. My investigation of the MMR issue exposed the frauds behind Wakefield's research, triggering the longest ever UK journal, blah, blah, blah. Mr. 11 was not the first parent with a child in the study whom I interviewed during my inquiries. That was Mrs. 2, the first of the parents to approach Wakefield. She was sent to him by an anti-vaccine campaign called Jabs. Her son had regressive autism, long-standing problems with diarrhea, and was the prime example of the purported bowel and brain syndrome, still unsubstantiated 14 years later, and now 30 years later. This boy would appear in countless media reports and was one of the 4 best cases in Barr's lawsuit. Did they still try this lawsuit and fail? Did they actually file anything for this? Does anybody know? Somebody look that up. I traveled to the family home 80 miles northeast of London to hear about child 2 from his mother. That was in September of 2003 when the lawsuit fell apart after counsel representing 1,500 families said that, on the evidence, Barr's autism claims would fail. Okay. By that time, Mrs. 2 had seen her son's medical records and expert reports written for her case at trial. Her concerns about MMR had been noted by her general practitioner when her son was 6 years old, but she told me the boy's troubles began after his vaccination, which he received at 15 months. He'd scream all night, and he started headbanging, which he'd never done before, she explained. When did that begin, do you think? I asked. That began after a few months afterward, but it was concerning me enough. I remember going back. Sorry, I don't want to be massively pernickety, but was it a few months or a couple of months? It was more like a few months because he had this kind of, slide down. He wasn't right before it started. Not quicker than 2 months, but not longer than how many months? What are we talking about here? From memory, about 6 months, I think. The next day, she complained to my editors. She said that my methods seemed more akin to the gutter press. But I was perplexed by her story, since there was no case in the Lancet that matched her careful account. According to the paper, child 2 had his first behavioral symptoms 2 weeks, not 6 months, after MMR. This was derived from a royal-free history citing headbanging and screaming at the start, taken by Mark Borelowitz, a child psychiatrist and a co-author of the paper. He saw Mrs. 2 during the boy's admission at age 8, after she had discussed her son's story with Wakefield. As I later discovered, each family in the project was involved in such discussions before they saw the hospital's clinicians. Wakefield phoned them at home and must have at least suggestively questioned them, potentially impacting on later history taking, but I knew little of such things and shared my confusion with Walker Smith, whom I met shortly after Mrs. 2. There is no case in the paper that is consistent with the case history Mrs. 2 had given me, I told him. There just isn't one. Well, that could be true, the former professor of pediatric gastroenterology replied, disarmingly. He knew the case well, having admitted the boy for the project and written reports for Barr, who paid him £23,000. Well, so either what she is telling me is not accurate, or the paper is not accurate. Well, I can't really comment, he said. You really touch on an area which I don't think should be debated like this, and I think these parents are wrong to discuss such details. Well, you could be put in a position of having a lot of medical details and then try to match it with this because it's a confidential matter. It was not merely medically confidential, it was also legally protected, a double screen against public scrutiny. But responding to my first MMR reports in the Sunday Times in February of 2004, the GMC decided to investigate the cases and requisitioned the children's records. The regulator's main focus was whether the research was ethical. Mine was whether it was true. So as a 5-member disciplinary panel trawled through the records with 5 Queen's Counsel and 3 defendant doctors, I compared them with what was published in the journal. And then multiple discrepancies. Damn. Okay. By Brian Deere. Wow, Ian Denlip, thanks for subbing. A man is suing his former legal team for pursuing hopeless claims based on flawed research into the MMR vaccine. Has emerged. Matthew McCafferty, who was diagnosed with autism 3 years after receiving the vaccine, is taking legal action over a legal claim that he says had no chance of succeeding. He's suing the lawyers Hodge, Jones, and Allen. Was this related to any of that? No, okay, don't care about that as much. Okay, this was the Dr. Wakefield, what exactly have you found? Interview for the research team leader. Well, this work started just over a year ago when we were contacted by a group of mothers who complained that their children had been developing perfectly normally until they had encountered an environmental insult. In many cases, they claimed it was the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and then they had lost all their acquired skills, such as speech, language, and developmental milestones. So this is a lie, right? It seems like these patients were either sought out or were funneled from anti-vaccine groups. And at the time, we were not sure of the implications of that. But what was interesting is that those children had also suffered gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea, alienating constipation and diarrhea, sometimes blood loss, and it became evident to us after 5 calls in 2 days that we had to look at this very seriously to investigate these gastrointestinal side effects in particular. Now, one of the questions that had been raised before, the claims had been rather put to one side of gastrointestinal disturbances. These were just a function of the behavioral problems, but we felt they merited taking a little more seriously, and so that we investigated them. Interestingly, we set out a study, 10 children, we thought might find inflammation, perhaps in 1 or 2 based upon the history. We've now looked at 40 children, and 39 of those have exactly the same findings, and that's been intriguing. The children have a patchy inflammation of the colon, rather like colitis, as we recognize it historically, and they also have great big swollen lymph glands in the terminal ileum, that is the end of the small intestine, and that combination, as we call it, ileohyperplasia, follicular hyperplasia of the terminal ileum, and colitis is the core of the gastrointestinal syndrome. Interestingly, they also have all undergone developmental regression after a period of normal development. Interviewer, there has been concern recently over any long-term effects as a result of the MMR vaccine. Are you saying now then that there does appear to be a proven link between the vaccine and the side effects? No, the work certainly raises a question mark over MMR vaccine, but there is no proven link as such, and we are seeking to establish whether there is a genuine causal association between the MMR and the syndrome or not. It is our suspicion that there may well be, but that is far from being a causal association that is proven beyond doubt. But if you say that there's at least a question mark over it now, should the vaccine continue to be administered while you're investigating? I think if you asked members of the team that they have investigated this, they would give you different answers. And I have to say that there is sufficient anxiety in my own mind of the safety and the long-term safety of the polyvalent, that is the MMR vaccine in combination, that I think that it should be suspended in favor of the single vaccines, that is continued use of the individual measles, mumps, and rubella components. That's a crazy statement to give after this one, saying that, well, we haven't proven shit. That's a wild statement to give here. Jesus, but okay. Because that begs the question that, do the advantages of continuing with the vaccines outweigh the disadvantages of a problem developing if you continue to have them? Well, I think it's a very complex question. Certainly if you continue, as I would recommend to use the single vaccine, you do not incur a greater risk of those diseases in the children, and that you do not lose the benefits of vaccination if you space them over time. Oh my God, that statement. So even measles? Well, as yet we don't know, but there is no doubt that if you give 3 viruses together, 3 live viruses, then you potentially increase the risk of an adverse event occurring, particularly when one of those viruses influences the immune system in the way that measles does. And it may be, and studies will show this or not, that giving the measles on its own reduces the risk of this particular syndrome developing. So you're saying that a parent should still ensure that their child is inoculated, but perhaps not with the MMR combined vaccine. Again, this was very contentious, and you would not get consensus from all members of the group on this, but this is my feeling, that the risk of this particular syndrome developing is related to the combined vaccine, the MMR, rather than the single vaccines. Now, what you seem to be indicating is that the effects are on this intestinal disease of the gut and also autism, which is a personality disorder. What's the link there? How can there be a link? Well, this is intriguing, of course. You've been looking for the cause of autism in the brain for many, many years, and yet have failed to define it. People have been saying for some time, people on the periphery of autism have been saying for some time that there may well be related or that this may well be related to bowel damage. The Italians, for example, have found that children who are autistic have in many cases a leaky intestine. Others, biochemists, have been saying that it may be a toxic state that absorption of chemicals such as opioid, peptides, and morphine-like substances from the gut that you and I produce in our diet from milk and wheat are actually getting access through that leaky gut into the developing brain. And perhaps if that occurs at a particular time of life when the brain is rapidly developing, then it is susceptible to long-term damage. And that is intriguing again because many parents report that certain foodstuffs make their children's behavior much worse and that withholding that food, those foods, improves their behavior. What we've been able to do here by directly visualizing and biopsying the bowel is to confirm, at least in this group of children, that there is a link. It may well be a link between gut inflammation and behavioral abnormalities. To be clear, that was not confirmed, that there's any kind of link. All you've confirmed is that both things apparently are occurring at the same time. That doesn't necessarily mean they're linked in any way. Is this likely to be a permanent damage, or can it be treated? We simply don't know at this stage. We entered this as a pilot study to look at 10 children, as we've now looked at 40. We've been going for a year. We sincerely hope that we can something to ameliorate the damage that's been done, but we do not yet know whether that's the case. Of course, there'll be many parents whose children have had this MMR vaccine who will now be concerned about what may happen to their children. What advice would you give them? Well, the interesting thing is that the damage, the behavioral or developmental change, tends to occur quite soon after administration. And this is where why parents or GPs or pediatricians have been able to make the link, the association with MMR. So if that hasn't happened, then it is extremely unlikely to happen. But there are going to be patients, or there are going to be patients. I just had a brain destruction. But there are going to be parents now whose children are about to have the vaccination, and they're going to say, I'm not going to risk it. What would you say to them? Well, my message is for the Department of Health and the regulatory authorities, and that is that this needs urgent investigation. It needs funding, and it needs the appropriate levels of commitment in terms of basic scientific research and clinical research to answer the question. And until that time, we cannot offer any definitive evidence, any definitive message to parents about this. Jesus. My opinion, again, is that the single vaccines, measles, mumps, and rubella, are likely in this context to be safer than the polyvalent vaccine. Okay, so that was those are his statements around the time. Much, 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 much stronger than what the actual studies said.
Just findings down the microscope from a highly experienced expert pathologist, the psychiatric findings, the neurological findings. That's what we reported. And we urged further research. Here was a great opportunity to understand what was going on and take what was historically an irreversible condition and be able to reverse it, to be able to treat it, to ameliorate the symptoms in these children and make their lives at least better. So it should have been an exciting time, but we defended the pharmaceutical industry, we defended government policy and the World Health Organization and UNICEF and the major pharmaceutical companies that make the vaccines, the American government. We defended a lot of people. And at that time...
because I speak American English and not your more beautifully accented English, you're not saying we defended, you're saying we had offended.
We had offended.
Yes, okay, yeah, so those are big interests to offend.
Oh yes, huge interest. Now, this is really interesting in a historical context because now we're all familiar with cancel culture. If you are a doctor, however eminent, you stand up and you criticize, say, COVID vaccine policy, that's the end of your job. Doesn't matter how many papers you publish, doesn't matter how eminent you are finished. The way in which the system historically now deals with this kind of problem is to simply cut the person's head off.
Except, just on the COVID example, we were told by the eminent public...
So, do you think that he's going to bring up any of the 30-year-old facts surrounding why this study was retracted, why his license was revoked, why people are so ass-pained about it, or will none of that come up?
Public health experts and by politicians who employ...
Destiny, isn't this the doctor that was hired to be part of the lawsuit going after the 3-part MMR vaccine? Yeah, he was supposed to be an expert witness for this. So, imagine some guy comes to me and the guy says, hey, listen, I've got a bunch of mad parents who want to sue. They want to sue this company. They want to sue Crayola crayons because their kid's hair is too blonde. And I want to pay you a bunch of money to be an expert witness for this. And I go, okay, fine. So what is your theory? It's I think that they ate Crayola crayons and it turned their hair way too blonde. It got way too blonde. And I'm like, okay, hold that thought. And then I go to a medical board and I say, hey, just so you know, there's decent evidence for this disease called, it's called Crayola blonde consumptionitis, where kids that eat crayons, their hair turns really blonde, okay? So can you give me 55,000 pounds to go study this condition? And the board is like, oh, sure, if you think there's evidence for it or whatever. And then they give me the money. And then I go, okay, hey, I'm calling the Who makes the competitor crayons to Crayola? I'm calling the Rose Art. I'm calling the Rose Art Foundation, and if you guys have any parents that are really mad because they feel like their children's hair is too blonde, then go ahead and like have them call me. And then all these parent companies like, hey, my kids ate Crayola crayons once, and their hair is really blonde. And I go, sick. Ship me like 12 of these kids, and let's go ahead and do a study on them to prove the existence of this disease that I'm being paid for by somebody else to be an expert witness to testify to the existence of in a court case that hasn't happened yet, for a disease that there's no evidence of, by a bunch of parents that are being selectively drafted from a company that also has a financial interest against the company that I'm going to be representing my clients against. Like, it's like so fucked. This is so beyond fucked, right? It's so fucked. But that's what this is. But we're not going to bring up any of this. Okay.
Them that the COVID vaccine was totally safe. It turned out it was not. People died. That it was totally effective in preventing you from contracting COVID. Those very same public health experts shortly thereafter admitted, actually, it doesn't stop you from receiving the infection. However, it'll stop you from transmitting it.
Yeah.
Shortly after that, those very same health experts told us it actually doesn't stop you from transmitting the virus, but it'll ameliorate the conditions. It'll reduce the danger of hospitalization or whatever. My only point on that is, those same public health experts admitted that the things they had just previously said as gospel truth were not true. So already there's a major credibility issue for the public health experts in recent memory.
Yeah. And so people know that now. They're familiar with it. And the doctors who stood up against them were bankrupted by legal fees, were removed from their positions, had their licenses taken away. These were some outstanding clinicians, outstanding academics, and they were just trashed, wasted for all time because they took a moral and professional stand on something. But then it was unheard of. So at the time, it was me and them. And this isn't a sort of feel sorry for Andy Wakefield. It's just an historical fact of life.
I do feel a little sorry for you. I mean, you did have your career taken from you.
But I was a consenting adult. I knew what I was getting into. And I just felt that I had to pursue this to its natural conclusion. There was nothing terribly grandiose about it. It was just the way I felt. And so I started to get labeled. Obviously, these labels they perpetuated in the media.
Conspiracy theorists.
And all kinds of things. And so that's fine. We continued the work until they made it impossible to go any further. And they leveled all kinds of allegations against me and against my colleagues.
Are we going to get into any of those and whether they were true or false, or
of research misconduct, the worst being the allegation ultimately that it was all fraud, it was all made up. And when you control the media, when you're in charge of the media, and your target is one individual with limited resources, that's kind of easy thing to do. They're an easy target.
Well, but the media, this was presented to that board of doctors or whatever, right? What evidence it said, and in Brian Deere's reporting, it said that this guy didn't call any witnesses or anything to defend himself. So
you take them out, and you hope that by doing that you will silence them, and you will provide an example to everybody else.
So they accused you of misconduct in the methods of the study. They accused you of taking money from other interests. They accused you. They had this whole litany of accusations in the popular media. Was there any truth to the allegations?
Here we go.
There was an element of truth, and the truth is, for example, the lawyers had come to me at some point during the conduct of this work, not the research, not the Lancet paper, and I had agreed, as is very common practice, to undertake a study to determine whether there was a link between the vaccine. Could we identify remnants of the virus in the disease tissue? That would have been a strong indicator that there was a causal link. It wouldn't have been proof, but it would have been a strong indicator. It was part of that. That would have been a strong indicator that there was a causal link. It wouldn't have been proof.
Of measles, though, originally is what he was looking for, right? I don't think it's common practice to not even declare this. Why wouldn't you declare the conflict of interest?
Right, but it would have been a strong indicator. It was part of that hypothesis testing process. And this is very common. People work for both defendants and for plaintiffs in medical litigation. But I was single.
Also, I actually don't know that if that's true. Is it common to do research? Like to do unique studies simply for the purposes of a potential court case? I feel like you call expert witnesses and you cite research that's already done. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure maybe there's been some, but to do unique special research just for a court case, especially when you don't even declare that conflict of interest?
Out as, Wakefield's doing this to undermine the MMR vaccine and launch his own vaccine onto the market and make a fortune. And
yes, they accused you of having a desire to patent for a rival vaccine. Yes. So you're not saying that isn't true. You're saying this is common practice. You're going after me as though I'm doing something different or unethical.
But the allegation was I never told anyone.
Yeah.
Well, a year or two before the paper came out, I wrote to the dean, the medical school officials, to my line manager, Professor Roy Pounder, and I said, I have been asked to undertake this duty on behalf of these children to answer the question, is there not a link with the vaccine or evidence for a link? And I feel morally obliged to do it, and I'm going to do it. So they knew. I then told it was in.
Well, but you accepted this before before you even began the study, not when the study was done and waiting to be published. The timeline here is very important, but
the National newspapers a year before the paper came out. Then Richard Horton, the editor of the Lancet that published the paper, who subsequently denied it before the General Medical Council, our licensing body, was told 1 year before that I was working on behalf of these children in the litigation. There was no
Well, if he denied it 1 year before and you said you emailed and you asked all these people, well, then just show the emails. That's super easy. You could just publish the emails and blow all these up. Has he ever published any of these emails? Anybody have any links?
to cover it up whatsoever. It's totally transparent. But the allegation was that it was a cover-up. That I meant no one knew about it. Right. It was all a big secret. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. But what do you do about that? When you don't control the editorial, they can say what they like. And then you've got to unpick that mess afterwards. Do what? Sue them. Suing someone costs $3 million. Where are you going to get $3 million from? They know that. These people have limitless resources.
Well, this is the purpose of lawfare is not necessarily to win in a court, though that sometimes happens. It's just to pressure the other guy who doesn't have pockets that are as deep as the litigant.
That's right. Justice, it seems to me, belongs to those who can afford it. And that was the circumstance here.
So then where does the headline that the study was retracted come from? Is it just out of thin air, or was it from the Lancet?
Wait, what is that? Was he even sued? I thought he just had his medical shit revoked.
As the litigant.
That's right. Justice, it seems to me, belongs to those who can afford it. And that was the circumstance here.
So then where does the headline that the
study... you're the one benefiting from the justice belongs to those who can afford it. You're literally being paid huge bucks by a litigation firm to be an expert witness. He's saying he couldn't afford to sue them. Oh, okay. If you have a good case, find a lawyer, take it on contingency. Fuck it.
It was retracted come from? Is it just out of thin air, or was it from the Lancet? Or
let's come back to that. So I think 8 or 9 of my colleagues were persuaded to sign the retraction of an interpretation. The interpretation being that MMR vaccine causes autism. I said, guys, when they asked me to sign the retraction, I said, we never made that claim.
You're asking me to retract something I didn't say.
How can you retract something that doesn't exist? But for political reasons, they were under pressure. I don't judge them, but they fell in line and did that. Me and 2 other colleagues just refused to do that. We said, no, we did not make that could be retracted in that way. So it wasn't the retraction of the bowel disease or the link with MMR or the regression or the diagnosis in these children. It was a retraction of an interpretation that was never made. And that's... Except
we read afterwards for the interviews and stuff that you literally made all of these statements, as you were interviewing, doing the press release for this pilot study of 12 people.
That's the truth behind it.
Can I ask you what might be
He tried suing the journalist? Ooh, did he? Wakefield sues Deere. Oh, and he dropped the case. What even is this website? Why do they publish? I don't know, they published news articles from journals? I guess the journals also publish news stuff? Okay. Andrew Wakefield, the British gastroenterologist whose comments at a press conference in '98 sparked a scare over the safety of the MMR vaccines, that dropped his libel action against Channel 4. The case was due to go to trial shortly after the end of the 3-month disciplinary hearing. Radcliffe's Liberasseur, the solicitors, acting for the Medical Protection Society, which was funding the libel case, said in a statement, consecutive hearings would have compromised Dr. Wakefield's preparation for both hearings and would have placed an intolerable burden on him. He remains confident that he would be vindicated. Lawyers say the society could face a legal bill of more than £500,000 for both sides' legal costs for the discontinued libel action. He sued Channel 4 and the investigative reporter Brian Deere. The program criticized Dr. Wakefield's methods and accused him of an undisclosed conflict of interest. He decided to drop the case. His decision to drop the case comes not long after a high court judge ordered the disclosure to his opponents of confidential documents supplied to the GMC for the disciplinary investigation, although there is no suggestion that the 2 developments are linked. Okay, so he dropped the case after... Oh, shit. No. Sorry, I just had a brain blast. I noticed that Pixie deleted her Substack, and I was like, why did she do that? It seems kind of weird. We're waiting on rulings from the judges. I wonder if, based on how they rule on the motions, because we haven't exchanged a discovery yet, I wonder if the motions go poorly, if they're just going to dismiss their case, and then she doesn't have to turn over anything. Holy shit. Can you do that? Is this allowed? Oh. I don't know. Sorry. That just popped in my mind. The documents included papers from his former employers, University College London, from the which one. Okay. Oh, okay. So he killed the case right before they exchanged discovery, which should have vindicated him, right? He later denied a conflict of interest, said the money had gone to his then employer, the Royal Free Hospital in London, and not to him personally. But it emerged last month that he had also received hundreds of thousands of pounds in expert witness fees in the compensation case. Wakefield said that the work had been spread over almost 9 years, including during holidays, nights, and weekends, and had been used to run a treatment center in the United States for autistic children. Jesus. To be fair, wouldn't her willingly dropping the case be optically good for you? Actually, I don't know. I think I would rather win at trial would suck because it would be expensive, or win on summary judgment. Her dropping the case? Because I feel like she could just say, I didn't have the money, and he was rich and harassing me, and so I had to stop because I couldn't fundraise enough. Oh shit, I didn't even consider. Okay, let's not think about that.
Stupid question.
Not at all.
Because you're mentioning a rival vaccine, potentially, that could have been patented. Why is it? I mean, I think of this as a parent. I got 3 young kids. Why is it that all the doctors are pressuring me to get the MMR vaccine when there's a measles outbreak? So I say, well, can my kid just get the measles vaccine? Why does he have to get measles, mumps, and rubella all at the same time? You know, the vaccine schedule today is so much more intense than it was even when I was a kid, and certainly decades prior. Why can't I just go get the M, and then the other M, and then the R? Why do I have to get them all at the same time? Is there some medical advantage to getting them all at the same time?
You know, I don't mean to sound obsequious, but that's an outstanding question. No, really.
Oh, good.
It was a question I asked. I said, what I did is I went away and I researched this. I was an academic. That's what you do before you're going to get embroiled in this.
Oh, he's actually going to give us an answer. That's good, because you were a fucking researcher.
Go away and you read every paper you can get your hands on that looks at the pre-licensing studies of these vaccines, and you say, is there any merit? Have the safety studies been done? Yep. And I went through it. I wrote a 250-page report. I thought, I must be missing something. I'm not doing these scientists credit who did the safety study. There must be something I'm missing. No, I wasn't. The safety studies on the vaccine were undertaken in small populations. They were not controlled trials. They were nothing that would have passed a drug trial for the FDA. And they were done on children in mental institutions because they were expendable.
What?
I was staggered by this when I found out, like Willowbrook State School in Manhattan, in Staten Island, New York, children whose lives were at the time deemed to be, they were up for experimentation. And this is where a lot of the vaccine safety...
The British government dropped a case when prosecuting an intelligent agent because the evidence they would have to give for disclosure would have exonerated the agent.
Trials were done in children who were severely mentally and physically debilitated. And I can't believe this. This is staggeringly unethical on every level. There was no mention of fully informed consent whatsoever. And these children were just used as experimental subjects. Now, there's a moral issue to that, an ethical issue. There's also a practical issue, and that is one of the concerns about measles vaccines is that they cause brain injury. And measles causes brain injury. So if you're looking for evidence of brain injury in already brain injured children, are you going to find it?
Right.
Can you extrapolate from those brain injured children to a normal population of healthy children? No, you can't. But this is where the safety studies were done. And when I finished that, I became more convinced than ever that I needed to pursue this to its natural conclusion. Not that MMR causes autism. Now, why MMR? Because when they put the 3 together, did they conduct the safety studies to determine whether 1 and 3 were equal in terms of their safety profile or something quite different?
Right.
No, they didn't. Again, I was surprised, because if I gave you 3 antihypertensive drugs, 3 blood pressure drugs at once, it would kill you.
Yeah.
And it would kill everybody it's been put into. So why is it okay when you're taking 3 live viruses and putting them together in combination in a way that nature has never seen them before?
Right.
Why is that okay? And so I did the research, and I found precisely that there was interference between the viruses in the component in the combined vaccine. But people had just, moved on.
Interference meaning what?
Interference is that the immune response induced by the single vaccine was different from that produced by the combination, the mumps in particular interfering with the measles. So I said to the Department of Health, because I said parents might want to opt for the single vaccines at the time they were available in the UK and the US.
I would be much more likely, really on any vaccine, to say, okay, we'll give them the single one first, and then maybe in 8 months we'll give them the other one, and then 6 months, I don't know. It seems more prudent to me, more cautious.
Does it? What is the basis here for I don't know, it seems better, I guess, maybe. Is it though? If you had an autistic kid who's eating all of his food separately, And it's like, why do you wait? Why do you eat all of your potatoes and then eat all of your corn and then eat all? And it's like, well, I don't know. I just don't want to mix the food. Otherwise, I just eat it in a blender. It seems like it makes sense. Like, what can we get like a better basis here? You're sitting next to or across from a researcher doctor. There must be a better basis for belief here than just seems like a good idea.
And I said to my colleagues, if asked by the media, this is the position I take. Vigorously support the continued use of the single vaccine, because that's what I believed at the time. But I can't continue to endorse this vaccine that's never been tested independently for safety.
Yep.
What happened is in the UK, the government stopped the importation license of the MMR vaccine, the main one we used. So you could no longer get it. It was our way or the highway. And so the option for parents was taken away, even if they wanted to protect their child against measles.
Well, you're saying they stopped the importation of the single vaccine or of the M? Just the okay, yeah. So the solution to your perfectly reasonable question was, well, now the parents won't even have the option. They have to get the triple dose if they want any vaccine at all for measles, mumps.
So then, if the MMR one is not working as well, and you said particularly the mumps causes interference, and either that the mumps is interfering with the other two, or the mumps isn't working, then shouldn't we be able to see that there's like a higher prevalence of this disease somewhere or whatever? Is that?
That's right. And what happened in the US is Merck unilaterally made the policy decision that they were going to stop making the singles or marketing the singles. It was going to be the combination.
I hate to ask you to engage in psychobabble, but I don't hate it that much because I want to know.
Why do you think they did this? Is it going to be profit or is it going to be demon evil people?
What were they thinking?
I don't know. I asked them, I said to the head of vaccination in the UK, why, if your objective is to protect children against measles, principally against measles, why would you take away the option of parents being able to do it with a single vaccine?
Yeah.
And she...
Just as a quick thing, this is real. I'm not making this up. Okay. I asked this the same question before and I forgot the answer. Compliance, compliance or the ability to follow through with a treatment is considered like an essential part of the efficacy of any medical intervention. Like it is incredibly important. Not incredibly important. It's an essential part of determining if any particular thing, actually. Can you actually prescribe it to somebody? Like, how likely are they to follow the treatment regimen? Like, I'm pretty sure this isn't strictly true, but I think theoretically you could probably have the dog shit insulin from a long time ago, and it would probably be similar-ish, maybe not quite as effective as the synthetic analogs today, if you literally had the glucose test machine and the shitty insulin, and every bite of food you kept poking your blood and poking whatever, and then injecting a little bit and doing back and forth. You could theoretically time it out to be more effective than just going from being hypoglycemic to hyperglycemic to going up and down your blood sugar with the shitty insulin. But nobody's realistically going to do that, right? They measure their blood sugar twice a day and then they drag themselves full of the bullshit insulin. This is why one of the reasons why the synthetic analogs is better is because it's slow release, it works over time. The compliance is going to be better. If you have 6 different vaccines that you need to administer and you find a way to be able to do all 6 of them, by the way, even in a slightly less effective way, if you find a way to do all 6 at once, that all 6 at once is probably going to have a way higher adherence than trying to tell a parent, come back in 3 months, come back in 3 months, come back in 3 months, come back, right? That would be one reason why being able to do as much as you can in a single doctor's visit would be beneficial. But
he said, because if we did that, it would destroy our MMR program. So the concern was for the program,
right,
and not for the well-being of children. And I was absolutely astonished. 1, that she said it.
Okay.
She actually admitted to it. And 2, that you would do that. So, and I said to David Salisbury, who was head of the government side of the vaccine, did you not do the safety studies to compare the single measles with the triple vaccine? And he said, no, we assumed that there would be no difference. You don't make assumptions on behalf of every vaccine. And he said, no, we assumed. Did you not do the safety studies to compare the single measles with the triple vaccine?
Is there no... So if I look for MMR vaccine safety, I don't even know how you would look up medical research like this or whatever. 2 studies indicate that for every 10,000 children who get their first MMR and varicella vaccines as separate shots when they're ages 12 to 23 months, about 4 will have a febrile seizure during the 7 to 10 days following vaccination. Children of the same age who get the combined measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella vaccine as their first vaccine are twice as likely to have a febrile seizure during the same time period. Okay, so this is comparing the MMR and varicella separately versus together. So it seems like this research exists. Studies have shown that children younger than 7 years old, there is a very small increased risk of febrile seizures approximately 6 to 14 days after MMR vaccinations. Okay, so that exists. Joint pain is associated with the rubella portion of MMR vaccine among people who do not have immunity to rubella. Joint pain and temporary arthritis happen more often after MMR vaccines in adults rather than children. Okay, so it seems like there is research on this, or... No published scientific evidence shows any benefit in separating the combination MMR vaccine into 3 individual shots. Why do we get multiple vaccines at once? Often, more than one shot will be given during the same doctor's visit, usually in separate limbs. For example, a baby might get DTaP in one arm or leg and IPV in another. Damn, that's like 8 shots at once. That dude is gigavaxxed. Holy shit. Advantages. Children should be given their vaccines as quickly as possible to get them protection during the vulnerable early months of their lives. Giving several shots at the same time means fewer office visits. This saves parents time and money and can be less... Oh, wow, look at that. Scientific data shows that getting several vaccines at the same time does not cause any chronic health problems. A number of studies have been done to look at the effects of giving various combinations of vaccines, and when every new vaccine is licensed, it has been tested among the vaccines already recommended for a particular age child. The recommended vaccines have been shown to be as effective in combination as they are individually. Sometimes certain combinations of vaccines given together can cause fever and occasionally febrile seizures. These are temporary and do not cause any lasting damage. Based on the information, both the advisory committee and... Okay, well, but maybe the CDC is still lying. Still... Why don't I have a lying thing for Hassan?
Vaccine. And he said, no, we assumed that there would be no difference. You don't make assumptions on behalf of every child in your country. You do not do it. They assumed that the COVID vaccine was going to be safe and made a decision on behalf of 8 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
Without, when they said it can be injected and it'll stay at the vaccination site. That was an assumption. They then found it went everywhere in the body, in particular, got into the brain and the ovaries and wherever else.
Oh, wait. A combined measles, mumps, rubella, varicella, MMRV vaccine is expected to facilitate universal immunization against these 4 diseases. Study was undertaken to synthesize current research findings. 24 RCTs, were including 19 RCTs compared single MMRV dose with measles, mumps, rubella vaccine with or without the varicella vaccine. So this is MMR plus VMMR. Similarly, blah, blah, blah. This looks like it's the MMR versus the MMRV. But I mean, if they did it for this one, I imagine they did it for the MMR versus the MMR separately as well, right? This is just fucking retarded. This guy's
That assumption was entirely wrong. You don't make assumptions about safety on behalf of anyone, let alone 8 billion people.
So
what a fucking
what year is this?
Weasley...
The UK decides, all right, we're going to ban the importation of the single dose. When did that happen?
This is towards the end of the 1980s. The 1990s.
Okay.
So paper came out in 98, so we're talking about the subsequent 2 years.
Okay. So they say, all right, no more. You have to get the MMR. At this point, I guess this is the time, late 90s, early 2000s, that people
where the autism diagnoses are increasing.
Really starting to speak about the link. Bobby Kennedy, now the Secretary of Health and Human Services, is suggesting there's a link between vaccines and autism. As you say, your paper invited further research. It would seem to me, I guess in my innocence, that this would be a great opportunity for scientists. Wow, this is great. We could, I could make my bones proving something really important in medicine. Does any further research happen?
We started to do a lot of research. And we published, before I left the Royal Free, it wasn't just that Lancet paper, we published 15 papers on this subject, pursuing it to its natural conclusion. But it was sabotaged and that came to an end. But I had the opportunity to go and present to the CDC. In 2001, I went to present to the Oversight Committee on Government Reform under Dan Burton. And then I went to a meeting with the CDC and they said, Dr. Wakefield, look, every kid gets MMR vaccine, some get autism. How do you explain that? Why don't they all get it? Well, that's medicine. A lot of people smoke, some people develop lung cancer. We don't know why. There are cofactors that influence your risk. But that's the way medicine works. What I said to them is, my group, and I am particularly...
If I were to look up, you're telling me there's not volumes of disease, like pathways to indicate or explain why they think cigarette smoke or whatever might cause lung cancer? There's literally zero idea. I mean, I'm sure we can't say definitively 100%, but... How does smoking cause lung cancer? Lung cancer happens when cells in the lungs develop changes in their DNA. Cells' DNA holds the instructions to be gay. In healthy cells, DNA is not gay, and then it becomes gay. Instruction cells... How smoking causes lung cancer. Researchers believe Smoking causes lung cancer by damaging the cells that line the lungs. Cigarette smoke is full of cancer-causing substances called carcinogens. When you inhale cigarette smoke, the carcinogens cause changes to lung tissue almost immediately. At first, your body may be able to repair this damage with each repeated exposure. I bet there's a fuck ton of shit that's like written about this. I bet there's like books and books and books and books and books that literally just dive into probably even particular cancers. The idea that we would just say that like, oh, we don't know how this works. It's like one of those things. This is like when somebody says, like when a super educated or expert person is like, oh, we have no idea how this thing works. And you think that like, oh, fuck, you must have no idea how it works. Like, I have no idea how it works. No, it's not the same thing, right? Like when a physicist says, oh, we don't know how gravity works. Like, oh, cool, me neither. I have no fucking idea. It's like, well, no, we can still like there's Voyager 2 has left our solar system and we can launch rockets to the moon and like shoot missiles with like pinpoint fucking accuracy. Did the Apollo missions have to account for Jupiter? I think they did, right? That's a big ass fucking planet, and I think it affects the rest of our solar system. Like when somebody says that, when somebody says we don't know how this works, that doesn't mean that they like truly have no fucking idea at all. They're just like a child stumbling around in the dark. But
said, Dr. Wakefield, look, every kid gets MMR vaccine, some get autism. How do you explain that? Why don't they all get it? Well, that's medicine. A lot of people smoke, some people develop lung cancer. We don't know why. There are cofactors that influence your risk, but that's the way medicine works. What I said to them is my group and I am particularly interested in patterns of exposure, unusual patterns of exposure. For example, exposure early in life. Measles, when you get it under 1, is associated with a much greater risk profile than if you get it after 1, when your immune system intuitively is more mature. So does the same pertain to the MMR?
Right.
If you get it younger, are you at greater risk of this adverse reaction being regressive autism than if you get it, say, 15, 20 months later? And they said the same pertains than if you get it after 1, when your immune system into measles, when you get it under 1, is associated with a much greater risk profile than if you get it measles, when you get it under 1, is associated with a much greater risk profile than if you get it after 1, when your immune system intuitively is more mature. So does the same pertain to the MMR?
Right.
What risk profile are we talking about? And does the MMR vaccine cause any of the negative side effects? I'm not even saying side effects, the actual effect of the disease of measles. Like this would be an immediately apparent and obvious thing, right?
If you get it younger, are you at greater risk of this adverse reaction being regressive?
What adverse reaction? Why not state something with a little bit more specificity? Like you're a doctor and you're a researcher. And he's not even just a clinical doctor. This is a research doctor. You should be able to speak about this with a much greater degree of specificity. But
than if you get it, say, 15, 20 months later. And they said, okay, we'll look at that. They went away, and to their credit, they did that study. And they found that it was exactly true. There was a highly significant risk of autism in those children who got the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine on time, 12 to 18 months, 12 to 15 months, compared with getting it later. The hypothesis turned out vaccine was a highly, we'll look at that. They went away, and than if you get it, say, 15, 20 months later. And they said, okay, we'll look at that. They went away, and to their credit, they did that study. And they found that it was exactly true. There was a highly significant risk of autism in those children who got the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine on time, 12 to 18 months, 12 to 15 months, compared with getting it later. The hypothesis turned out to be true.
But you mentioned earlier.
What study? Hello? Can we at least get a journal? If not a study title? Researchers? Hello? This is a research scientist. You should know the answer to this, right? What?
That you might have some of these risk factors just from getting measles, just getting the virus. So could one argue, well, it's better to get the MMR vaccine at a younger age because if they get measles below the age of 1, they're going to be right there in the same predicament.
I swear to God, if he now people will do this often. When they talk about the vaccine, they will talk about every fucking side effect under the sun to explode how many people might be negatively impacted by it. But then when they talk about the disease, they're like, oh, this disease hardly kills anyone. They only talk about death. They never talk about any of the other side effects that might happen or any of the other negative outcomes of the disease. It's only death. But he's not going to do that. That would be so stupid.
Is measles a greater risk factor for developing these symptoms than the MMR vaccine? Is there any difference between the two?
From the clinical perspective, I can say that of all the children, by the time I left the Royal Free, we'd seen 183 children with this syndrome. And in those, there were just 2 who'd had the single measles vaccine. The rest had had MMR. So it seemed to be, at least at the clinical level, an idiosyncrasy of the MMR vaccine, if there were a causal association. The other question you have to answer.
Okay. His unique. Okay.
Answer is if yes, if the prevalence of the disease had remained constant, or even gone down with vaccination, then it may have been that single measles, the natural measles, was more dangerous. But it had gone up exponentially. It had gone up dramatically. And so...
Wait, measles had gone up dramatically or autism? What?
The opposite seemed to be true, that this combination, given early, was a risk factor, which is what the study found. So...
also a risk factor for what? Can you name some of these... like what are these side effects that we're talking about? Are these acute things? Are these chronic conditions? Are these like really fucking bad or not that big of a deal? Like a common adverse, like you could say that there's a vaccine that produces 40% likelihood of an acute adverse reaction when a child gets a vaccine. And that vaccine injury, that I don't know if it's kind of an injury, but an adverse reaction could just be a fever. And that fever might last for 12 hours, right? Like,
we knew nothing about that. Why? Because the CDC buried it.
Oh my.
They buried it.
What does the CDC buried it mean? Like it was published in a journal and the CDC bought all the journals and then buried them in the ground? Or?
For 14 years, they put millions of American children at risk of a serious permanent neurological disease in order to protect themselves, their credibility, and the program. They destroyed documents, they altered the data, and they presented a paper that said, it's okay, it's fine, go back in the water, the vaccine is safe. And so this only came to light when Dr. William Thompson, the senior author on that study, the man who designed the study, collected the data, collated it, interpreted the data, called a scientist, Dr. Brian Hooker, and said, we've done a terrible thing, and I can no longer live with it. And I kept the original data, even though my colleagues destroyed it, because I knew it was foilable, I knew that it may become part of some legal proceeding. Here it is. And he handed it over. And it showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the CDC had committed the most outrageous fraud in the context of this vaccine. And that was the thing that really convinced me that it was the cause. It wasn't my study, or even the subsequent studies. And that strengthened my...
Okay, now this is a super biased source, I would imagine. Okay, but I just Googled these, I was curious. But this is literally from a source called vaccinateyourfamily.org. So we'll take it with a grain of salt and we'll look up other stuff. So the CDC whistleblower accusation spotlighted in the film Vaxxed. In August of 2014, anti-vaccine activists Brian Hooker and Andrew Wakefield released a video of recorded phone conversations with Dr. William Thompson, a researcher at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In the recordings, Dr. Thompson claims to have evidence that the CDC altered the rules of data collection for a study in order to omit data which would have shown African-American boys had a greatly higher incidence of autism after MMR vaccination. Hooker used the raw data provided by Dr. Thompson to write and publish his own analysis. Dr. Thompson, however, has not spoken about the issue in public, releasing only a statement through his lawyer that does not address the claims he made to Hooker and Wakefield. Independent reviews of his claims have shown there's no evidence of the increase in autism cases after vaccination in African-American boys or any other subset of the population. The story. Who is Dr. William Thompson? Dr. William Thompson is a psychologist employed by the CDC. He was a co-author on a number of vaccine safety studies published by the CDC, including the study that he claims omitted a correlation between autism and vaccines. Who is Brian Hooker, and what is his associate? Brian Hooker is a biochemical engineer who has a son with autism. He believes his son's autism was caused by vaccination. Hooker concluded in his paper, the present study provides new epidemiologic evidence showing that African-American males receiving an MMR vaccine prior to 24 months of age or 36 months of age are more likely to receive an autism diagnosis. Brian Hooker used a different methodology than the CDC authors did to analyze the data. When collecting data, you must know what type of study you're conducting to ensure you collect the data correctly. Using a different methodology after data is collected will produce unreliable results. Hey, remember that? It's similar to getting the ingredients for a cake, but then trying to make a pie. I don't know if that's the analogy that I would go with, but... Oh, who's trying to get in? Well, hello. Stop. Is there any more information about this somewhere? Vaxxed. What a great name. From cover-up to catastrophe.
Would have never done his original study, gotten that published in the Lancet, would have never created the uproar that rightfully it should have created, then the CDC would have never studied this.
The press conference for the Lancet paper was called by the Dean of the medical school, who was the chairman of the media committee.
Temporal association between MMR and...
Hey, this is what we're looking for.
I had done an extensive research into measles vaccine safety and MMR vaccine safety in the pre-licensing phase. In other words, what safety studies had been done before these vaccines were put onto the market and into children. The 250-page report was compiled by me, showing that the vaccine safety studies for MMR in particular were lamentable. They were lamentable. There are many, many assumptions have been made about the safety of this vaccine, and there had been problems which had been airbrushed. So I wrote to my colleagues and the dean, and I said, going forward, there are going to be questions about what parents should do next. I cannot, in due conscience, support the continued use of the MMR vaccine, having done this research. I said I will continue to vigorously support the use of the single vaccine, but can no longer use of the MMR. And I said, and there had been proper...
The safety measles vaccine. Report by Dr. A.J. Wakefield, FRCS. Organizations. Does this mean that, was this published, or the safety of measles vaccine? The report you're referring to is a study published. Scholars published a flawed study that linked autism to measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, prompting a widespread scare. While further scientific studies found no MMR in 2010 when a British medical panel in a new study, confirmatory bias on health decisions, evidence from the MMR autism controversy. Economist Xin-Yi Chao, the author, and then the Arthur F. Searing Professor of Economics and earnestly Associate Professor. Listen, economists think they can fucking research anything, okay? This is what happened, all right? You have hard sciences and you have soft sciences, all right? In the soft sciences, economics is a soft science, but because these guys learn a bunch of math and they publish a bunch of Greek symbols in their papers, they're like, actually, we're a hard science. And then they're still a soft science. So they think they're better than everybody else. So they're like, we're actually going to go and we're going to do research in every other soft science field just to show how much better we are than all of you. So you'll get all these papers in psychology and criminology and everything. I guess even in medicine, these motherfuckers, and there's always these economists, okay, that run around with their little math functions. They want to fucking publish everywhere. Fuck you guys. Stay away. I'm just kidding. Or I'm not kidding about that. They do, but I think it's just because they do a lot of statistical analysis and shit. Can you find... Does anybody have that original report thing? The safety of measles vaccine. Is BMJ like British Medical Journal? Does that mean that it was published, or?
I believe that there may be...
Not you.
Lamentable. They were lamentable. There are many, many assumptions have been made about the safety of this vaccine, and there had been problems which had been airbrushed. So I wrote to my colleagues and the dean, and I said, going forward, there are...
They've started from the position the MMR vaccine is safe, and that any change in policy following claims of adverse events must be set against that position. Their starting point was and remains wrong. Any drug, especially one that involves 3 live viruses, must be considered dangerous until proven otherwise. This has never been proven, and therefore all claims of adverse events should have been thoroughly investigated. They have failed to honor this obligation. Ooh, honor spelled with the British way. Yikes.
There are going to be questions about what parents should do next. I cannot, in due conscience, but can no longer support the use of the triple MMR vaccine. So the dean, as chairman of that committee, had 3 choices. He could have not had a press conference. He could have banned me from the press conference. Or when the question came up, as inevitably it would, what do parents do next about vaccinating their children? He knew what my response would be. He could deflect the question to someone else. When the question came up on the day, he directed it straight to me.
To show you we are not, and also setting the need for these vaccinations, but we are all freedom. That is extremely important.
All I recommended at that press conference was that parents opt for the use of the single vaccines, single measles, single mumps, single rubella, until the issue had been resolved scientifically. What happened when I made that recommendation? Unilateral decisions were made by the government in the UK to withdraw the importation license for the single vaccines, Merck opting in the US to cease the production of the single vaccines, giving parents no option. I said to a senior representative of the Department of Health, why, if your objective is to protect children against serious infectious disease, why would you take away the option of how parents do that? And she said, because if we allow parents the choice of single vaccines, it would destroy our MMR program. In other words, the concern was for the protection of the program over and above the protection of children.
No one's career has ever been advanced in the medical industrial complex by being outwardly and openly critical of the vaccine industry. I'm Mark Laxell, father of a daughter diagnosed with autism.
Like, 2 different companies in 2 different countries. Are they all in on it? And also, what is the motivation? Like, wouldn't you want to create super soldiers for your people? Why would you want to kill all your own citizens? What is the motivation for this? Can somebody help me understand? Like, explain the conspiracy. Like, we want to fuck all of our own citizens over. Like, why would you do that? Like, I would understand the conspiracy was like, measles and rubella are not actually a big deal. So when you take the MMR vaccine, it's just a bunch of saline and then just the mumps vaccine. And that's all they're doing. They give you a bunch of bullshit. And then they're telling you they're giving you 3 vaccines. It's bullshit. Those diseases have been eliminated. I can understand that. It's like, oh, okay, they're just like gassing, or they're inflating their profits or whatever by calling it a triple vaccine and it's a monovalent vaccine and it's just like saline and one. But like what? But like all the governments and all the educational institutions and all the medical companies are like, we're actually secretly killing all of our population. Like, why? Yeah, and then also, if you want to make even more money for everybody, for the doctors, for the hospitals, and for the vaccines, wouldn't you want to have 3 separate vaccines? Oh, now we can have 3 separate office visits, 3 separate appointments you have to make, 3 separate vaccines that you have to pay money for. Wouldn't you make more money doing that than combining all of it into one thing?
Be a cause, but the need for the CDC to do that really convinced me that they knew there was a problem now.
So ironically, you're convinced of this link between the MMR and autism, not by your own research, primarily by your own research, but by the CDC, which then sought to totally undermine your credibility.
Absolutely. And then Thompson said, this is 14 years later with all that damage done. It didn't mean at this stage still that the vaccine caused the disease in scientific terms. What it meant was the CDC had an obligation to do a bigger, better study somewhere else to see if they could replicate it, or to at least advise parents that they may wish to delay the vaccine while this issue was being resolved. But they did none of those things. They buried it and caused terrible damage in order to protect themselves and their reputations. And that I found absolutely heartbreaking. And
wait, we can test this right now. Who makes a shampoo and conditioner? Axe shampoo. So theoretically, like the 2-in-1 should be twice as expensive as the one? I guess it's not the same because it's not twice the size. Never mind, fuck you.
Thompson, the CDC scientist, contacted my wife, sent her and said, we could have salvaged your husband's career if we'd been honest. Well, it's irrelevant. My career is, it doesn't matter about me because the issue isn't about me. It's not about me. It's about something much more important.
Oh my God.
About all of those children out there who were exposed unknowingly to this issue when the truth was something quite different. It was really sad. And so I can live with whatever's happened to me. Because as I say, I was a consenting adult. I knew what I was getting into, at least to some extent, and I could have pulled out at any stage. These children couldn't. They had no voice.
So the CDC conducts this study, proves your point, buries the study, then comes out and says the MMR is great. On what basis, if any, does the CDC say, forget about that study, that we're not going to tell you about the MMR is great?
They don't. And this is why when we made the movie Vaxxed, which took their recordings of William Thompson admitting to this, of all the original documents, this is why when we made that, which effectively accused them of the most egregious fraud, we heard nothing more. There was no pushback. If we'd said one thing that was out of line, that was false, that was defamatory, we would have been sued to the moon and
for
back.
Every penny we're worth. And
absolutely. And they said not a word. Why? Because they knew it was true. And that's where we are today. We took it to Congress. We said, you have got to have an inquiry. You've got to investigate this. They didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to touch it. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. They didn't want to touch it.
So as all this is going down, you're facing not only soft pressure and reprisals, but they took away your medical license. How did that happen? Where does that stand now? Why haven't you sued them into the ground and gotten your medical license back?
Well, you could say, why would I want to be part of that villainous crowd?
Fair enough.
I really want to do it. Now I'm a filmmaker. I write and make films. That was in England. I now live in Austin, Texas, and it was. I could dwell on that. I could go back and use whatever resources I have left in the world.
Well, he did do 2 court cases, right?
To try and restore my credibility, my standing in the world. I don't care. It's not important. If I have a limited amount of time left on this planet, I'm not going to indulge it trying to exonerate Andy Wakefield or have his name, have the media reverse their, they're not going to do that. I don't care. It isn't important. There is something far more important. And that, of course, is the position. It hasn't gone away. You've got to ask yourself, why is it being talked about now more than ever, particularly with Bobby Kennedy in the White House? Things have changed dramatically. And this is because of not only the truth of the parents' original story that is borne out, but because a few people have stood by those parents and continued to research this to its natural conclusion including Bobby Kennedy.
Now, what was the justification for not just going after you for some study, but for revoking your medical license?
Well, for example, I'll give you some examples. We conducted unethical research on developmentally compromised children without the appropriate approval from an ethics committee. So we were alleged to have conducted unethical research. No, we didn't. Firstly, it was clinical investigation. It was merited clinical investigation based not on my opinion, based upon the opinion of one of the world's leading pediatric gastroenterologists and his team of clinicians, who then discovered a new inflammatory bowel disease. Okay? So you're having a journalist, sort of hack journalist, saying it's not ethical, when Professor Walker-Smith in testimony says it absolutely was ethical. This
guy tried to sue them in a Texas court. What the fuck? The libel action filed in Texas by Andrew Wakefield against the BMJ, its editor-in-chief, Fiona Godley, and the investigative journalist Brian Deere had been thrown out before it reached first base. In a one-paragraph order, the Travis County District Judge, he didn't even sue him in federal court. He sued them in a state court in Texas. Judge Amy Clark Meekum ruled that the case could not go ahead because the Texas courts had no jurisdiction over the 3 British defendants. Okay.
This investigation needed to be done on clinical grounds. Didn't matter. To the General Medical Council panel, we were guilty of experimenting on children. So they'd made their minds up before we ever went into that room.
And there's an irony, as you mentioned earlier, that the safety studies on the vaccines conducted by the powers that be were conducted on vulnerable children. Seemed rather unethical to me when they were doing it.
It would have been unethical of us not to do it.
Oh my God.
Absolutely unethical of us not to do it. We did it. We found that the parents were right and the children had a disease which we could then treat. But no, they held that we were experimenting on vulnerable children. It was beyond belief.
Like, why don't the greedy big pharma companies want to come out and steal your cure for autism? How much money would there be in a pharmaceutical company coming out, especially when they've diagnosed so many kids with autism now, right? How much money would there be to cure it? This is retarded. Okay, well, this was good.